Hey, today is June 18th, 2025. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. I'm joined by two of my favorite people here, Nigel Hannaford, Western Standard opinion editor.
Good to be back.
And Cory Morgan, Western Standard senior Alberta columnist.
Glad to be the fixture at the end of the table.
That's why we put you over there.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about the Alberta government's decision to end taxpayer funding for your 139th COVID booster shot. That means from now on, if you want to keep on getting COVID boosters, you're going to finally have to pay for it yourself, like almost any other vaccine. So that's created some predictable brouhaha from the predictable people that you'd expect it from. We're going to talk about the G6 meeting just west of us in Kananaskis, just west of us here in Calgary. It was supposed to be the G7, but Donald Trump pretty much flew in and flew out. He kind of did the Frankfurt thing, where he just kind of, I think he was just transferring to another location or something as he was flying through, essentially.
G6.5. There you are.
And yeah. We'll talk about what happened there. We have Western Standard reporters on the ground, and we'll talk about what developed and didn't develop. And is it our war? That's where we're going to start. Israel has attacked, as everybody knows, it's not news. Israel's attacked alleged Iranian nuclear enrichment facilities for building a nuclear warhead. We're going to talk about Israel's decision to do it, but also the larger discussion around, is it our war? Our war being, the broader Western alliance, NATO plus. Right now, Donald Trump is weighing what to do. Just before we walked in here, I saw him speaking at the press. He says, maybe I will, maybe I won't. Nice enrichment facilities you got. It'd be a shame if anything were to happen to them. It's a question that is very much dividing the MAGA coalition. The MAGA coalition is very different from, kind of the older neoconservative coalition, that you'd see under George Bush, and then it kind of petered out in the McCain and the Romney years, where the Republicans were the hawk party. They're going to export democracy, as I forget who said it, but someone eloquently put it, we're going to free the shit out of them. These kind of endless wars in the Middle East, ostensibly to make the a world safe for democracy, as was attempted in the First World War. Israel's hit these facilities, but it seems likely they probably have not finished the job. The big facility of most concern is buried beneath the mountain, and most experts say that only the Americans have the bunker buster bombs that were literally designed for that facility. They designed new bombs 20 years ago to blow up that facility. The Americans have got them, so they need those bombs. They need V-2 bombers. Big question now is, will the Americans intervene? So there's a lot of ways to come at this. I want to start with it first about, was this attack justified? I come from the position that if, in fact, Iran was an imminent threat of obtaining a nuclear warhead, that it was building a nuclear warhead, and that it was on the cusp of doing so, then I think Israel's strikes would be justified. But the evidence provided so far is far from definitive. It's not good enough, I think, just to take the Mossad's word for it after the 2003 invasion of Iraq on the same pretext. The Iranian regime is, the usual chicken hawks on Twitter say, you're just backing the mullahs. You must be an Islamofascist or something. No, the Iranian regime is about the most odious and evil regime on planet Earth. And the world would be better for every dead mullah that we've got. But there's a lot of bad regimes in the world, always has been, and there always will be. And Iran would be a lot harder than Iraq. It is many times the size geographically. It's about 3 times the size by population. Its military is considerably larger. Most estimates put its full forces at around 900,000, shy of 1 million men under arms. this would not be even a guess of war. This would be a cataclysmic region-wide war. God knows, maybe even draws in some of the other great powers, but even if it doesn't, it would be a cataclysmic regional war. I think I'd put it that it's incumbent on Israel to provide hard evidence that Iran was building a bomb and that they were on the verge of a bomb to justify these strikes.
Little post facto justification. The thing is that they've already gone and done it. You know, when you're looking at the burden of evidence, you say, do we have the evidence that they were on the cusp of getting a bomb? I don't know. But I do know that with their own lips, they have contemned the great Satan, which is the U.S., and the little Satan, which is Israel, for the last 50 years, since we had that nasty little go-around with Jimmy Carter and the deposition of the Shah, the hostage-taking of the American diplomats. That's all they have talked about. We are going to destroy you. That's addressed to Israel, but it's also addressed to the United States, just Israel first. So if you're going to have 50 years of rhetoric saying we're out to kill you, at some point, when does it not just become stupidity to ignore it and say, oh, that's just those guys, they're blowing off steam. They have to say that for their own people. Well, they don't have to say that for their own people. Their own people hate them. So this is very much...
some of their own people hate them. They do have a lot of support in Iran. There's a very large westernized liberal minority in Iran, but I don't think it's fair to say that the Iranian people broadly hate the regime. That it's a divided society, and
it certainly is. That's
openly.
Yeah, you have to be a little careful. But I mean, some people really put their lives on the line in some of the public demonstrations, and it's very clear that that regime is not universally loved.
No.
So, all of that saying, if you were an Israeli prime minister and you think that Iran, having developed the technology to drop a rocket in your backyard, is also saying we're working on a nuclear bomb, and when we've got the two together, we're going to destroy you, there is a very solid argument, whether they're a week away, a month away, or 10 years away, for doing what you can to slow them down. And I think the Israelis have already accomplished that, by the way.
Well, they've been slowed down, but it's not stopped. That's why they want American intervention.
And that's why they want. And I mean, there certainly is an argument. Well, all right, you guys have done what you've done, and it's worked. So now it's, instead of being a year away or a month away, it's 10 years or 15 years.
But the Israelis have claimed that the Iranians are on the verge of getting a bomb for 30 years now. Now, maybe they're right this time.
Well, it's the first time they've actually gone and done anything about it, so they obviously have some... Like, this would not be lightly undertaken.
Sure, but we can't take their word for it. I mean, George Bush going into Iraq in 2003, I would like to think, was not lightly undertaken. The Saddam Hussein regime was nearly as odious, maybe not as extreme as the Ayatollahs, but it was an odious, murderous, and genocidal regime.
Pretty much par for the course for an Arab country.
Yeah, actually, it was one of the worst on the block in a very bad neighborhood. But I mean, the Israelis have claimed this for a long time, and
what would you accept as being the trigger moment?
We need evidence. Now, I understand the need for a preemptive attack. Well,
like seriously, the Iranians are going to come back and say, "Oh no,
I'm a fairly sympathetic." I think I'm a fairly sympathetic guy to the cause. I detest the regime, but will become better when they're eventually gone someday. I'm a pretty sympathetic guy to hear the argument. I just haven't seen the convincing evidence yet. The same with Saddam Hussein. I was a teenager when it happened. I grew up in military towns, and this was a very big thing. But the evidence failed to materialize. And I get the need for a preemptive strike. The 7 Days War was a preemptive strike. And Israel provided the evidence for that post facto. So I get that. But you better be pretty ironclad in that. You better have it to provide post facto if you're going to make a preemptive strike, Cory.
Well, there's a fear that the evidence will be a mushroom cloud over Tel Aviv. I mean, there's the other part that could come afterwards. But I know. I mean, Mossad, CIA, they do some good things, but they're also organizations you can't trust necessarily anything.
By nature, they're intelligence agencies. By nature, they do some shady shit.
And, there's open secrets of the Middle East. I mean, technically, Israel doesn't have nukes either, but everybody knows they have them. Iran says they're not working towards a nuclear program. We all know they're working towards it. The question actually is, how far along are they? That's the question. And, Israel's saying it could be as much as just a couple of weeks away from having that capability, or it could be another 20 or 30 years. How do you prove that? I don't know. Israel's got other motivations right now. And, I'm generally pretty supportive of Israel, but Iran's also been proxy funding the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas and basically keeping those terrorist groups that are picking at Israel from the sidelines all this time. Israel's happy to have an excuse, I think, to just give them a bit of a slapping around to remind them that there's going to be a price to continue to mess with Israel. But yeah, we're going to, I think, especially with the potential for this to turn into a kinetic, larger ground war. I mean, it's a big army. It could turn bad. We would, I guess, hope then that there's justification. But a lot of it has to go on faith, because we can't trust any of the organizations at their word on this.
We're sitting here in Calgary, so yeah, we can afford to say, show us the evidence. But if you're sitting in Tel Aviv,
you don't know when it's
this is getting too close for comfort. Let's go and do something about it.
Look, if I was sitting in Tel Aviv, I'd be likely to just more blindly trust whatever my government's telling me. But I'm not sitting in Tel Aviv here. I'm sitting in downtown Calgary, and my son is too young to fight in a war, but I'm concerned this turns into a bigger war, and young Alberta, Canadian, American, French, German sons get drawn into a war, and we have to die. Because
the sort of mirrors and levers that would involve Canada in this.
Perhaps not Canada, because we have no capacity to fight an overseas war, but I'm talking about the Western blood and Western treasure more generally, even if it's not Canada. I still feel a kinship with Americans, French, Germans, Poles, Italians, and I don't want to see any of our blood and treasure spilt for another forever war in the Middle East unless it was absolutely necessary. And I have not seen the evidence yet.
So why does it have to be a forever war? You go in, you drop the bomb, it's over.
Well, you want to drop the big one. Okay, well that sure.
Or you're talking about the bunker buster, not
Okay, well, when you say it's a bomb, that means a particular kind of bomb. That's the capital T.
The bomb we're talking about is the bunker buster. You drop it, it destroys the facility.
Okay, but Iran,
done and dusted.
Iran domestically would be then well within its rights to consider that an act of war, and we could very much then the possibility of a much larger kinetic ground and air war becomes an extremely real possibility. And Donald Trump used the term unconditional surrender when he was leaving the G7. He was, I think maybe he just blew it on the ground when he said it. We talked about this briefly just the other day. I'm hopeful he does not understand the proper meaning of that in the Yalta and Atlantic Charter sense of the word, meaning we have to launch a ground invasion of this huge and militarily powerful country. If we thought Iran and Iraq were difficult, we're in for a whole new order of nightmare if we want to go fight one of these kinds of wars in Iran. Could they be defeated in the field with relative ease by the Americans if they fully mobilized? Yeah. But if you want to defeat them and occupy them, set up McDonald's and strip clubs and give them democracy, we're in for another 20 years.
Works well anywhere in Iran or Afghanistan, or Iraq and Afghanistan. But the hard part is there's a real fear, though. If there's any country in the world, I don't lose sleep over Russia having nukes, even though Putin's a crazed dictator as well, or China having nukes, because they still don't seem inclined to really use them. Yeah. If any country would actually potentially push that button, Iran's among them, and that's one you really kind of got to worry a little more about than you do with other countries as well. Could you? Hindsight's 20/20. Could you imagine the hindsight again if these lunatics did manage to pull it off and go and fire somewhere?
No, I actually do agree with the premise. If the Israelis are telling the truth, I actually agree with the premise of their casus belli. Iran must not have a bomb. I'm not that. I'm a general non-interventionist, but I'm not a doctrinaire under no circumstances, non-interventionist. Iran must not be allowed to have a bomb. These guys have an apocalyptic world vision in their theology.
Even if it was suicidal, they're a martyr type culture. So hey, well, it was for Allah we blew up Israel.
Yeah, the communists may have been evil and terrible, but they didn't want to die. They therefore acted as rational actors, and you could game these things as terrifying as those games were. You could game it out, and we didn't nuke each other. Good. These guys, I don't think the math quite applies. So I'm in agreement.
Just the same argument when it comes to a regular war too. They're not easy to battle because it's my path to 72 virgins. Because the ones I found here are terrible.
You've just lowered the threshold of evidence required considerably with that statement.
No. I don't think I have.
So
I'm saying they must not be allowed to have a bomb. But we have to have convincing proof that they were about to get the bomb before we're willing to potentially trigger a massive regional war that could kill millions in the end if this escalates.
Perhaps we'll get it, but we need to have some more leaders demanding it, I guess. Or if they're presenting that evidence to anybody, I would think maybe behind closed doors to Trump and the others. One thing about Trump, as much as he talks and blusters, and I'm not a fan of his, never have been, but he's never been a hawk. He's never actually been all that keen on getting into American soldiers on the ground. So I think to some degree he could be reasoned with if he could find a way to avoid those things. I think they would have to present him with evidence before he's ready to.
Yeah, but I'm not willing to take any leader's word for it. Even leaders I like or not or have a respect for. I mean, J.D. Vance is trying to make this argument. He had an extensive post on X, saying like, look, Donald Trump is the least interventionist president in the post-war era. I think that's correct so far. So this, he's earned a little trust on this. Sure. Okay. Maybe, he's got more credibility than your run-of-the-mill Republican and Democrat. But I'm not willing to take anyone's word for it that, like, guys, I've seen the evidence. Trust me. George Bush said the same thing. And at least George Bush presented some false intelligence to us.
Well, maybe they've learned from that, I guess.
Well, they're going to have to. They got to show us the money. I don't think.
What the money look like?
Some
Cory,
kind of evidence.
Cory said it did the mushroom cloud over Tel Aviv. Well,
I think that'd be more evidence than we want.
Well, how much would you? What would convince you?
I don't know. Photos. People who have worked inside. I don't know. I'm not an intelligence source. I'm not an intelligence agent here. But we need evidence. If you're going to launch a war that could potentially become something much bigger and could potentially kill millions of people. We got to go on more than someone's word.
We can reverse that onus. I know it's trying to reason with the unreasonable, but maybe if Iran wants to avoid this, they could say, well, we'll bring in some outside observers to our facilities and prove we don't have this. I know it's forcing them to prove a negative, but
the atomic agency's been trying to get in there for years. Yeah. They've not let them in.
They've been a little less than...
a little suspicious.
I think, there were similar problems with Iraq. There were similar problems with Iraq. Saddam Hussein was less than entirely cooperative. But in the end, he did not have the bomb. He was not building the bomb.
Well, the bomb wasn't the issue because they destroyed the Osiris plant years before.
They were claiming he was
chemical and a whole bunch of other stuff too.
They claimed that he was restarting these other weapons of mass destruction programs. Turned out to not be true. But he had been less than cooperative. So failure to cooperate is certainly suspicious. It certainly should set off alarm bells. But in and of itself, I don't think is casus belli for a potential cataclysmic war.
Well, the toothpaste is out of the tube now, though. So the only thing left, again, as they're saying, is whether or not the Americans do that final.
So let's talk that. To finish the job, finish is maybe the wrong word. To finish destroying the nuclear facilities, they need the American B-2s with bunker buster bombs. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the job's done. But Iran might take this as a full state of war, and we're going to have to fight it through to some bloody conclusion. So destroying those facilities with B-2s does not necessarily mean the end of the war. Maybe it does. I don't know. But the Israelis appear to have bet. Trump said he told Netanyahu not to do this. Netanyahu went ahead and did it anyway on the assumption that the Americans will be drawn in and will do it. Now, that is not a sure thing, but that was the gamble that Netanyahu has made. Put it to you, Nigel. Should the Americans intervene here?
First of all, I'm not sure that was a gamble because, like we said in the previous segment, they will, whatever state that program of developing nuclear weapons had reached, what has happened in the last week has set that back a very long time. So,
But it was
They don't-
Netanyahu took the gamble that the Americans would intervene to finish them off in the end with
yeah,
B-2s.
well, maybe that's
he did not have a
what-
guarantee they would, but he took
But he has already achieved, on behalf of Israel, security from an Iranian nuclear attack. I'm not qualified to judge, but probably for 10 years. You know, maybe it's only 5, maybe it's 20. But what they've already done without that facility being destroyed is already thrown the Iranians seriously off. And by the way, if it's thrown it off for Israel, it's also thrown it off for the United States, because you don't need a missile that can go from Tehran to New York. You just need a means of delivery. Well, that could be a container on a cargo ship. So that's so America has an interest in making sure.
But should America intervene here? Because if they do, the Iranians are then likely to more directly target American assets, and it increases the chance that this becomes an all-out regional war.
I guess that depends on their own intelligence at this point. I mean, as we've said, it didn't seem like Trump's too eager to jump in unless he sees something he feels might justify it. Something else that's interesting, a development out of this, though, was Jordan stepping up when Iran was responding and knocking out some of Iranian hardware coming over their country. So Iran has lost a lot of friends around themselves, too. We're not talking about this necessarily going into a full-out regional war. Jordan's got no love of Israel, but at the same time, they don't want to get
all of the Gulf Arab states, and then some in the Levant, like Jordan. These guys hate Iraq. Again, this is a Sunni Shia conflict largely, because these guys are terrified of Iranian hegemony in the region. And if Iran does get the bomb, well, then the Saudis are going to buy a bomb in the next week from Pakistan or something. It really is opening a door into a dark room as soon as Iran gets the bomb here. But equally so, a potential regional war. But does American intervention lessen the chance of this expanding into a bigger war, or does it increase the chance?
Well, it depends on how if Americans intervened and they definitively splattered things enough in Iran in short order, I don't think other regions will be eager to raise their hand and say, let's jump in and play in this sandbox with the rest of them. I mean, wars change too. I mean, we're not going to see a bunch of violence and all the tanks rolling across the desert like we saw, 30 years ago. And in some ways, it makes it more likely for them to jump into it. But you're not putting as much manpower on the ground as you used to. You're doing a lot more remote control, almost video game style.
Well, I'm not sure Iran is really in a position to fight a war, even if it wanted to. Like right now, the Israelis have total control of the Tehran skies. They don't actually have any people there. So who are you going to shoot? As if you're an Iranian. So Iran would be in a position of saying, we hate you. We hated you before, now we hate you even more. There's not much they can do about it.
I'd be concerned about Iraq, because Iraq was the implacable enemy of Ayatollah Iran. Saddam Hussein was there because it was the Sunni minority dominating country that was majority Shia and with Kurds. We don't want the Kurds in either of the religions.
Nobody wants the Kurds in a whole separate issue.
But it's now that it's democratic, it is ruled by Shiites with Iran.
It's hard to say because Sunni, Saddam Hussein was Sunni, and he still didn't get along with Iran by any measure.
No, that's my point.
Oh, yeah.
Saddam Hussein was removed,
Yeah,
and the Americans pulled out. The Iraqi regime became a lot more friendly with Iran. Iran is extremely influential right now in Iraq. And that gets you awful close to the borders of Israel at that point. And I don't think the Canadian military could do much to stand in the way if they had both of them.
If we're waiting for the peace in the Middle East, I guess we're going to be waiting a while. We just got to hope for the best. That's all we can. I know you're saying. We're never going to get. I mean, the thing is, they come up with evidence. You don't know if you can necessarily trust that either. Or Geiger counters came up and found this material from that blowing up that mountain. We know there was.
I want something between a mushroom cloud and taking a politician or intelligence agency's word for it. I want something in between those two.
Maybe we'll get that.
So say, well, I'll have the research assistant look that up.
Yeah, we'll put a reporter on.
Yeah.
Okay. It segues nicely to where we're going next. Leaders of the United States, Germany, France, Britain, Italy, Japan, and Canada met for the G7. Short drive from where we're sitting here in Calgary, just west of us in Kananaskis country. A couple ways to stab at this, but the meeting was, I think, significantly disrupted by Donald Trump pretty much touching down Sunday evening. Yeah, actually, I was sitting down to watch TV for the evening. It was, like 9 o'clock ish. My house started to shake, and that was Donald Trump and Donald Trump's helicopter, Marine One, and then his Osprey helicopter escorts rolling right over my house, pretty low, on the way to the G7 coming from the Calgary airport. So he touches down Sunday night, and he left not too long into the day, Monday. I don't know, may even been before noon, but he was pretty much in and out, touching down like he was just a quick little layover at an airport, switching flights. Went back to the States to deal with the evolving war in the Middle East here. Without the American president for this, I don't know, is there any point to the G7 without an American president present?
It's not so much the person of the president, it is the strategy that whoever is president is following. The issue here is that the G7 was formed at a time by democratic countries interested in free trade with the idea of pursuing those objectives, democracy and free trade. Without going as deep as a bunker buster bond takes us, it is simply the fact that the United States is the biggest part of the G7 in terms of gross domestic product production. They're not interested in free trade anymore. They're interested in protection. And that removes right at the root the whole point of the G7. We are actually, you heard it here first, we are actually living in a few years during which the whole new era of international affairs is going to be rewritten. It was rewritten at the end of the Second World War. It was rewritten when we went into the free trade era of the 1970s, 80s, 90s, all the liberalism represented by Reagan, Bush, and Bush II. And now we're coming out of that, and we're going into big power blocks. So it'll be United States, China, particularly. And the G7 doesn't have a place in that because nobody is interested in what the G7 has been doing for the last 40 years. They're interested in doing something completely different. So Trump wasn't particularly interested in the business of the G7. I don't think. He came in, he signed a deal with the British. He patted Mr. Carney on the arm and said everything will be all right in a few weeks, and left. And that, I think, is the end of the G7. I don't even think there's a G6 to be salvaged out of it because the Americans are not part of it.
Well, I mean, the G6 is essentially the main European countries plus Japan and Canada is increasingly the only reason Canada was ever included in the original G7 was
courtesy.
It was courtesy. They were being nice to us.
Mm-hmm. I hate to say that, by the way. I mean, when I came to Canada in 73 and 74, I thought it was a great place. It was rocking. Things were going well. I was proud. It's just what the last 10 years have done, sadly and bitterly reduced us.
Well, we're bordered in Italy now, which makes us, I think, effective. We're a rich second world country at this point. Yeah. To Nigel's point, both for and against it at the same time, oddly, the G7 doesn't deal just with major economic issues. It kind of depends on what's dominating the news cycle at the time that the G7 is held. Often it's dealing with foreign policy. Zelensky was there. Sometimes it's dealt with COVID, etc. The Americans do have a different agenda on trade, it would appear, than the other G7 members at this point. But its relevance on foreign policy must also be diminished if it ever really had an influence, because this is a key moment in foreign policy, and Trump decided not to stay there with other major leaders in the Western world plus Japan. He decided that was not the most relevant place to be. It was just in Washington in the Situation Room. What is did anything of any significance come out of this meeting?
I don't think so. As Nigel said, it was kind of a beginning of an end, perhaps. Trump snubbed it without much regard. I mean, the claim was that things are escalating in Israel and Iran, but I haven't seen any action out of Trump since then that was telling me that he really needed to be in Washington to make some of those decisions or be briefed on issues or, be there in person or anything of that sort. It sounds more like a pretense to me. And anything that would have been sticky diplomatically is Zelensky being there, and he maybe just wanted to avoid the headache, which shows, again, the indifference he kind of treats the G7 with, though, that it's a headache. I don't want to bother with it. I'm just going to kind of bow out after making a token appearance, shake some hands, smile, get a picture.
I feel like he treated it the way most Canadian prime ministers treat a premier's meeting.
Yeah, pretty much.
You're the senior guy in the room. You want to show up for a picture, but you don't want to be pestered by these.
You didn't even get the picture.
No, they didn't even take the group.
The tradition of having a group picture, he wasn't there for it. To your point, you asked, well, was there anything significant? Diligent readers of the Western Standard will already be aware that there were, in fact, 6 statements that were agreed upon, and this is what they were: securing high standard critical mineral supply chains that power future economies. That's one. Driving secure, responsible, and trustworthy AI solutions. Boosting cooperation to unlock quantum technology's full potential to grow economies. So that can start tomorrow. Number 4, mounting a multilateral effort to prevent, fight, and recovery from rising wildfires. I won't even bore you with the other 2.
Sure.
They are in the Western Standard in a thoughtful editorial that we published yesterday. It's not worth the effort that goes into preparing these meetings if you're not going to deal with the big money issues, and that's now a thing of the past.
This is stuff that could have been done by a committee of bureaucrats through email.
Well, actually, it's funny as you think. I mean, all this stuff is the product of bureaucrats. They work on this. They're already working on the next year's one. They haven't been told that the game's up. They're already working on this for next year. And all that happens is they get all the paperwork together. The leaders fly in, they shake hands, they sign the paper, make a few statements, get the group photo, and everybody goes home. And in this case, Trump said, if that's all it is, I'm out of here.
I guess one small victory. I mean, we know that a former prime minister was pining away because he desperately wanted to be the man to host that, if only for his final act as a prime minister, if he knew he was on the way out the door, but he couldn't cling that long. And whatever Carney might have done, at least he didn't do anything to embarrass us. There was always that risk with our last prime minister that he's going to pull a stunt.
Well, he didn't pull his socks up for us.
Yeah, he's at least
he wasn't doing mean girl gossiping.
He's got some dignity about himself and diplomacy, whereas our last leader didn't. Because we'd always cringe whenever our last prime minister went overseas or was hosting something like this. Because what's he going to do this time? And again, I'm not a Carney fan by any means, but at least you don't have to worry about that. So a small victory.
Yeah. The other, I was disappointed mostly because so we had 2 of our reporters, two of our new staff on the ground at the G7, G6 meeting in Kananaskis there. I was really looking forward. We were trying really hard. We were actually in contact with the White House to get into the pool to ask questions of Trump. One really, really relevant question.
I was really hoping that would get it.
Oh, it would have been so good because this is in Alberta. This is in southern Alberta. He's close to the epicenter of the independence movement in Alberta. And we wanted to ask Donald Trump that in the event that Alberta does vote for independence in the likely coming referendum we're going to have, will he recognize Alberta's sovereignty? Because any answer other than no would have been an earthquake. He would completely upset the calculus of the federal government, which would hope that it could simply reg the puck on negotiations and Alberta stays within Canada no matter how it votes. But our best laid plans for that were kiboshed when Trump took off to go back to Washington.
See, up until you put that thought to Catherine Levitt, that he was going to stay for the whole show.
But you have to wonder if he was in beautiful Kananaskis in the Rocky Mountains.
I want to answer the question.
Yeah. But you have to wonder, Trump, didn't stay too long, but he's flying out, looking at the place, I think. This place is pretty nice.
Casino, go there.
How he actually flew over casino. He flew over 2 casinos on the way there.
Yeah, there's like a Trump Great Eagle and
Trump National.
Oh God.
Yeah. You just have to wonder how much he was like, this place would be real nice. Okay. So we're taking it from the international to the international, locally to the local. Cory, ever since COVID boosters became available, COVID vaccines and then boosters became available, governments everywhere in Canada have been paying for this. Alberta, I believe, is the first government that has said it's going to finally stop paying for this. COVID is really getting in the rearview mirror now. It is not a significant threat, particularly if you're not a senior living in a communal living home. And even there, it's pretty low now. But wherever it is a lingering, remaining threat of any kind, that would really be only it. So the Alberta government said it's ending taxpayer-funded COVID boosters. If you're on how many hundreds of boosters you're into at this point, you're limping around,
perforated,
yeah, and you're demanding more boosters. So unless you're the immunocompromised, people living in communal seniors homes, they're still covered. But everybody else, you got to pay for on your own. It's been a pretty predictable reaction from the predictable people on that.
Yeah, if it had been any other premier, they would have said, well, they're being pragmatic with changing times. But it is the great devil Daniel Smith. So thus, there's an underhanded anti-vax motivation behind it. Not the fact that only, 14% of Albertans are partaking in that vaccination any longer.
Is it as high as 14% still getting COVID boosters?
I think it was 14. I could be to be corrected on that.
But too many stupid people still here.
Well, there's still some vulnerable people, seniors, others who could find some benefit from vaccination with that.
Yeah.
As well, a whole pile of it. I mean, it has a shelf life, and as been pointed out, we've been throwing millions of dollars down the drain because we've had this big backlog of vaccinations that nobody had to pay for, and they're choosing not to go in and get them. So why on earth do we continue to offer them? It's a common sense statement. I'm supposed to, and I'm constantly getting encouraged by my wife to bother going and getting the shingles vaccination. That's $400.
I caught shingles a month or so ago. I didn't even know what it was until I was...
Well, and for people who get badly infected with it, it can have some terrible long-term consequences and make them very, very ill. And after a certain age, you're encouraged to get it. But even with that, they say you're encouraged to get it. But this is one of those things you'll have to reach into your pocket and pay for to get by yourself. Mm-hmm. We can't pay for everything for everybody all the time. I mean, I understand that our socialists in office feel that that's plausible. That's part of why we have a healthcare system that's overwhelmed and waiting lists that are interminable, because we are trying to be everything to everybody all the time. So yeah, if there's only demand from 14% of the populace for a particular service, why are we funding it for 100%? It was a common sense decision. But the establishment's going to paint it as Smith just being the evil, wicked witch of the West.
So the Western Standard actually had, just to pat ourselves on the back, we had this story first before the government announced it. It was a nice little scoop. But there was a very predictable reaction. One is, what's the politics of this? I think, people who are against the COVID vaccination, they're obviously happy to see this gone. I think most people generally don't care because most people are not taking their 300th booster at this point. It's a pretty small number at this point. As Cory points out, some of those people I think actually is fairly legit. You're in a communal assisted living home for seniors, you're immunocompromised. Those people, I get them. And for them, it's still covered. But what's the NDP's political calculus, do you think? And, screaming, ringing the alarm bells about this when almost no one's taking it at this point who's not immunocompromised.
Well, I mean, I think the political calculus isn't any more sophisticated than if Danielle Smith is for it, we're against it, and if she's against it, we're for it. So that's, at the very basement level, whatever she says, they're going to disagree. But I actually have a theory that the NDP honestly believes that you need to have a kind of a nanny state approach to public health. That they were very happy with the situation back in 2020, 21, where everybody had to do what they were told, and if they couldn't, then there would be penalties. And, take your medicine. Well, they still think that. And it's remarkable that they do so, because there's now strong evidence that these vaccines were neither safe nor effective. We published a graph, I think it was yesterday. It's in Murray Lytle's column on the subject. And it shows, what it shows is, at first there was this spike in deaths from COVID. And then it kind of got a little better and a little better. And then you hit 2021 fall, when everybody was encouraged forced really to take vaccines. And there is an almost vertical spike like that. Massive increase in the number of COVID deaths after the introduction of the vaccines. Now, I'm not saying that the vaccines caused the deaths, but what I'm saying is it didn't prevent them.
Mm-hmm.
And so people said, whatever, meanwhile, plenty of people tell you what a rough ride they had when they had the vaccine. And there's some evidence that I'm not qualified to judge, but it certainly needs to be investigated by somebody who is, that there were adverse outcomes from people who did take the vaccine because they were ordered to. So my thought on the whole thing is that Albertans generally are pretty skeptical of the vaccine. They have good reason to be. But if you're a member of a party that believes in top-down control, you haven't got that message yet.
Well, let's
remember the NDP.
Let's remember the UCP under Kenny was imposing exactly that kind of top-down control when he was still in power. The NDP's only problem was he did not go far enough for what they wanted. But he essentially did everything that they wanted. They would just then layer more things on top of their demands.
Well, and it's it'll be in the column that I have coming out this week, but I write on that just that, now we're seeing measles popping up. We're seeing whooping cough popping up. And I attribute a lot of the people who are choosing not to get these well-established vaccines now due to the authoritarian, untrustworthy push that the government did. It made such mistrust that now, unfortunately, people are choosing not to get the vaccines, which were proven to be safe and effective. It's backfired, and it's actually made us more unsafe.
Well, what we're forgetting is that the thing that they gave you for COVID actually was the vaccine.
Yes.
They had to retroactively change the definition of vaccine in order for them to be honestly able to use the word. I mean, it could be.
It's led to people losing trust in all of them, which is bad.
Yeah, I mean, some of these are very long established and proven medical technologies that have saved millions of lives around the world. And I know there's a lot of reasons for the
what I'm saying. If you have a get the bloody measles vaccine.
Yeah, like it's
mumps. I mean, your tetanus shots, things like that.
Yeah, but you're bang on that. The authoritarian measures taken during COVID created a general distrust of vaccines, and I can understand why. It's reasonable, but I think it's the wrong conclusion to draw from the COVID experiment.
Yeah, it was an unintended consequence.
Conclusion.
Yeah, and being more authoritarian, unfortunately, is their instinct on how to deal with them. Hearing people talk about, we got to force measles.
There's a lot more mandates on this.
Boy, you're not helping.
You're just going to go in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's turn it now to our parting shots. I'm going to give it to you first today, Cory.
Sure. Well, I'm back on justice. It's always a favorite of mine. I just read stories, that just make my hair grayer. We saw the one recently with the judge saying the gentleman shouldn't do any time in jail because he had just a modest collection of child porn. Now there was
it was tasteful.
Yeah. So here's another one with a guy who pushed his girlfriend off a 50-foot cliff to her death, where she wasn't found for 3 weeks until a friend of his finally ratted on him to say, hey, by the way, he killed his girlfriend. She's at the bottom of the cliff. Part of the defense was that there wasn't a guardrail there. So I guess we should always put guardrails up, not to stop people from pushing girlfriends off cliffs. His sentence got reduced, though, on this to 698 days in appeal. If we can't get 10-year sentences for people who do things like this, where are we going? Meanwhile, I saw a story resurfacing in the Standard covered that well, whereas we took a guy who sold eggs and put him in jail for a couple of days. And Tamara Leach is still in the midst of the longest mischief trial in modern history. Mm-hmm. Our justice system has just got priorities that are just completely out of whack.
So because you went there, I'm going to put myself second for parting shots because it's a good segue. The egg farmer who got in trouble and they came to murder his chickens until he, put them on the Underground Railway to get them out. That was because of supply management. And Parliament just passed Bill 202. It is a Bloc Québécois private members bill from the previous Parliament that they managed to revive. And it makes it illegal for the federal government to include any discussion of supply management, that is Canada's Soviet-style command and control price and supply fixing regime for primarily dairy, but also eggs and parts of poultry and things like that. Parliament just voted to pass it, including, and we expect the socialist parties to vote for that kind of thing. The dairy cartel is so powerful, we get it. But I want to shame half of the Conservative caucus that voted for it. Half the Conservatives stood on principle and voted against the bill. Even if all the Conservatives would vote against it, it still would have passed. So there's very little political risk, I think, there. But half of them are still scared shitless of the dairy cartel and voted in line with it, voted with the Bloc, the NDP, and the Liberals and the Greens for this atrocious piece of legislation. And it just shows that our political class, the entire left, and at least half of the Conservatives are not very elbows up. If we are really taking this trade crisis seriously, we would put one of the weakest, most ridiculous parts of our economy on the chopping block in negotiations, because we're better off without it ourselves. And it's a huge barrier to trade agreements, which is why the grain growers came out today, because they know that bill is going to mean less exports for our actual competitive industries. So I just want to take a moment to shame the half of the Conservative caucus that voted for that bill.
Amen. And as for me, I would say that whether you are at a G7 meeting or playing poker, if you won't get much done if you don't have a Trump.
Ooh.
Oh, well done. Okay. Well, mic drop there.
Yeah.
Finish it like George Costanza and go out on a high note. All right, Cory, Nigel, thank you very much. Thank you, John, for producing today's show. Thank all of you for joining us on the pipeline today. Remember, if you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, you really should be. Go to westernstandard.news, click on subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year for unlimited access to all Western Standard content. We've got reporters in Calgary, Edmonton, Regina, Vancouver, pretty soon probably back on Parliament Hill. We've got lots of stuff you don't want to miss and get past that pesky paywall, and you'll be supporting the work that we're doing here at the Western Standard. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless.